She was right outside the door. But a Hell's Angel knew she was too scared to go home. Rachel Doyle pulled into the parking lot of Maple Grove Apartments at 6:15 p.m., and her stomach dropped before she even cut the engine. The light was on. Third floor, second window from the left. A warm yellow square against the darkening sky, the kind of light that in another life might have meant welcome home. Dinner's almost ready. I missed you today. In this life, it meant something else entirely. It meant Craig was already there. It meant he had already looked at the clock. It meant he had already started counting the minutes since her shift ended, already started building the case against her before she'd even walked through the door. She put the car in park and sat there, hand still on the wheel at 10:02, like she was still driving somewhere. The store had been slow today. Mista Halvorsen, the manager, had let her stay an extra 10 minutes to finish counting the register because the girl who was supposed to relieve her was running late. 10 minutes. That was all. But 10 minutes could turn into an hour in Craig's math, and an hour could turn into questions that had no good answers, only wrong ones dressed up to look true. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story she started rehearsing. Mr. Halvorsen asked me to stay. I couldn't say no. He's my boss. No, that sounded like she was choosing her job over him. Craig hated that. There was traffic on Miller Road. Better. Simpler, traffic didn't have a face he could blame, couldn't call and complain about. But if he'd driven home the same way, if he'd noticed there wasn't any traffic, then she'd be caught in a lie, and a lie was so much worse than the truth, even when the truth wasn't good enough either. I'm sorry I'm late. It won't happen again. That one was safest. It always was. Don't explain too much. Don't give him extra material to pick apart. Just apologize, small and quick, and hope the size of the apology matched whatever size of anger was waiting for her upstairs. She caught herself in the rearview mirror and almost didn't recognize the face looking back. Tired eyes. A crease between her eyebrows that hadn't been there 5 years ago. She practiced smoothing it out, relaxing her jaw, softening her eyes into something that looked like calm. It didn't feel like calm. It felt like a mask stretched too tight over something that wanted to scream. 7 o'clock came and went. She watched a woman walk her dog across the lot, watched a minivan pull in and unload a family of 4, laughing about something she couldn't hear. Normal people, living normal lives, walking into homes where the porch light meant something good. At 7:30, she thought about turning the car back on and just driving somewhere. Anywhere. The grocery store. The library, if it was still open. Some place with fluorescent lights and no one waiting for her. But she didn't have anywhere to go, and even if she did, leaving would only delay the conversation, not cancel it. Craig would still be there tomorrow morning. Arms crossed, temper simmering, twice as sharp for having stewed on it overnight. By 8:00 her rehearsal had worn a groove in her mind, the same 3 sentences turning over and over like a stone tumbling in a creek, smoother each time but never disappearing. I'm sorry I'm late. Mr. Halvorsen kept me. It won't happen again. The dashboard clock ticked past 8:30. Her hands had gone cold, even though the car wasn't. She thought about Denise's laugh from the courtyard the other day, thought about how easy it seemed for other people to just walk into their homes without their whole body clenching first. She wondered what that felt like. She used to know. She couldn't remember anymore. At 8:40, she made herself move. She checked her reflection one last time, smoothed her expression into that careful, practiced neutrality, the one that gave nothing away and asked for nothing back. She stepped out of the car, locked it out of habit, and crossed the lot toward the building, her shoes quiet against the pavement. She climbed the stairs slower than usual tonight, one hand trailing the railing. At her door, she reached out, and her hand froze on the handle. Tank Morrison sat at his kitchen table with a rag in one hand and a chrome bolt in the other, working the grease out of the threads the way he'd done 1,000 times before. His apartment smelled like engine oil and coffee gone cold. Parts were laid out across the table in neat rows, cleaned and ready to go back onto the bike, waiting in pieces in his garage stall downstairs. It was slow, careful work, the kind that let a man's hands stay busy while his mind wandered wherever it wanted. Tonight, his mind wasn't wandering far. It kept circling back to the window over the sink, the one that looked out onto the parking lot. He told himself he wasn't watching for anything in particular. Habit. That was all. 15 years of training didn't just switch off because a man lost his badge. You spent that long learning to notice things, learning to read a room or a face or the way somebody held their shoulders, and it never really left you. It became part of how you saw the world, whether you wanted it to or not. So when he glanced up from the bolt in his hand and caught sight of the same gray sedan parked in the same spot near the light pole, something in the back of his mind clicked into place before he even thought about it. He set the bolt down. The car had been there when he'd started working. Must have been close to 2 hours ago now. Engine off. Headlights off. Nobody getting out. He wiped his hands on the rag and stood, moving to the sink for no reason except that it put him closer to the window. He didn't want to stare. Staring felt like an intrusion, even from behind glass, even at a stranger's car in a public lot. But he let his eyes drift that direction anyway, and he saw the shape of a woman behind the wheel, still as a photograph, hands somewhere up near 10 and 2, like she was gripping something that wasn't there anymore. Tank had seen that stillness before. Not in this parking lot, not with this woman, but he knew it the way you know a song after the first 3 notes. It was the stillness of somebody working up the nerve to walk into a place they didn't want to go. He'd seen it on porches and in driveways and outside apartment doors during all those years, knocking on strangers' houses with a case file tucked under his arm, back when doing that had still been his job. He picked the bolt back up, told himself to let it go, and went back to cleaning. 20 minutes later, he looked up again. The car hadn't moved. He finished the parts on the table, working through them one at a time, wiping each clean and setting it aside, and every so often, his eyes cut back to that window without him meaning them to. The evening wore on. The sky went from orange to purple to the flat gray black of full night, and the parking lot lights buzzed on, throwing pools of yellow across the pavement. And still the woman sat there in her car, unmoving, like she was waiting for a wave that hadn't crashed yet. He thought about going out. He didn't. It wasn't his business, whatever it was. Maybe she was waiting on a phone call. Maybe she'd had a long day and needed a minute alone before facing whatever was inside her apartment. People needed that sometimes. It didn't mean anything. Except Tank had learned a long time ago that it usually did mean something when a person sat in a cold car in the dark for hours rather than walk through their own front door. He glanced at the clock above his stove. 8:40. That was when he saw her move. The car door opened. Slow. Careful. Like she was testing whether the sound would carry. She stepped out, smoothed down the front of her jacket, and glanced up at the building before crossing the lot toward the entrance. Tank watched her go, watched the careful way she walked, shoulders drawn in, steps quiet even though there was nobody around to hear them. Something in his gut tightened, familiar and unwelcome. An old alarm bell he thought he'd left behind 15 years ago. He shook his head and reached for another bolt. Not your business, Morrison, he told himself and went back to cleaning. A week later, the rain came down hard, drumming against the window over Tank's sink like it had somewhere to be. He stood there with a mug of coffee going cold in his hand, not even pretending to work on parts tonight. The garage stall downstairs sat empty. His bike could wait. The gray sedan was back. Same spot near the light pole. Same stillness behind the wheel. Fourth time in a week, and each time it settled into his chest a little heavier, like a stone dropped into water that never quite hit bottom. He watched the rain hit her windshield in sheets, the wipers off, the glass turning into a blur of gray and yellow light. He couldn't see her face clear through all that water, just the shape of her, small behind the wheel, hunched forward like she was trying to make herself smaller than she already was. Tank set the mug down on the counter. He'd spent 15 years learning how to spot the difference between somebody having a rough day and somebody who was scared to go home. It wasn't a science, not exactly. But it wasn't guesswork either. It was in the shoulders. It was in how long a person sat there instead of grabbing their bag and walking. It was in the way this woman never used her phone, never fiddled with the radio, never did any of the ordinary things people do when they're killing time. She just sat. Like she was bracing for something. 15 years, and some habits didn't wash out no matter how much a man scrubbed at them. He thought about the last time he'd ignored a feeling like this. He didn't like to go back there, not often, but the rain and the window and the woman sitting frozen in her car dragged him there anyway. A house on Miller Street, a boy's bruises that a court said weren't proof enough. Tank had walked away that day because the rules told him to walk away, and it had cost a child 2 more months in that house before anybody did something about it. He'd sworn after that he wouldn't let the rules stop him again, and the last time he'd kept that promise, it had cost him his badge, his pension, his entire career. He didn't regret it. He'd never once regretted it. But he also hadn't stopped flinching, all these years later, whenever a feeling like this one crept up his spine. The rain kept falling. The sedan kept sitting there, engine off, headlights dark, the woman inside unmoving as a photograph nobody had bothered to take down. He set his coffee mug in the sink. Not your business, he told himself. Same as he'd told himself the first night, and the second, and the third. 3 times he'd talked himself out of it. 3 times he'd gone back to his bolts and his rags and let the woman sit out there alone with whatever was eating at her. Because it wasn't his place. Because he didn't know her. Because a man with his history had learned the hard way that barging into other people's lives without an invitation could break things that were hard to put back together. But 4 nights in the rain, and something about the rain made it different. Rain had a way of stripping the excuses down to nothing. Nobody sat in a cold car in a downpour for 2 hours because they were catching up on a podcast. Nobody did that unless the thing waiting for them inside was worse than the storm outside. Tank looked at the clock. 8:52. He thought about Denise upstairs, about the state he'd found her in all those years back, and how nobody had come for her either, not until it was almost too late. He thought about how many nights he'd told himself somebody else would handle it, somebody with more authority, somebody whose job it actually was. Nobody else was coming tonight. There was just him, and a window, and a woman sitting alone in the rain. He grabbed his jacket off the hook by the door, shrugging it on in one motion, the leather cold and stiff from the damp air already creeping into the building. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have words worked out. No smooth line to ease into things. Nothing but the plain fact that he could not sit at that table one more night and watch a fourth evening slide by while a stranger sat frozen in the storm, too afraid to walk into her own home. He pulled the door open and stepped out into the hall, letting it shut behind him, and headed for the stairs. The rain hadn't let up by the time Tank made it outside. It came down in that steady, cold way that soaked through a jacket in minutes, but he didn't rush. He crossed the lot at an easy pace, ducking first into the gas station on the corner, the bell over the door jingling as he stepped in dripping wet. 2 coffees, he told the kid behind the counter. Black's fine for both. He didn't know how she took hers. He figured black was safe enough, something a person could doctor up themselves if they needed to. He paid, tucked the 2 paper cups into a cardboard tray, and pushed back out into the rain. The sedan hadn't moved. Of course it hadn't. He walked up slow, giving her plenty of time to see him coming, his boots splashing through puddles that had formed in the cracked asphalt. When he got close enough, he raised one hand, not to knock right away, just to let her clock him standing there first. Then he tapped 2 knuckles against the glass, gentle as he could manage with hands that weren't built for gentle. Rachel jumped like she'd been struck. Her purse slid off her lap, and she grabbed for it, nearly dropping it into the footwell, her whole body flinching toward the door like she was thinking about running. Tank stepped back half a foot and held up the tray of coffee where she could see it clear. He didn't smile too big. Big smiles from strange men in parking lots didn't put anybody at ease, not in his experience. "Sorry," he said, loud enough to carry through the glass but not shouting. "Didn't mean to spook you." Rachel stared at him, her hand still pressed flat against her chest. After a second, she cracked the window, just an inch, enough for words to pass through and nothing else. "Who are you?" "Tank, I live downstairs. 2 floors below you, I think, if you're the one in 3C. He nodded toward the building. "Saw you sitting out here. Figured you could use something warm." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked from his face to the coffee to the parking lot behind him, like she was checking for something. Or someone. Tank stayed put, rain running off the end of his nose, patient as a man waiting on a fish that hadn't decided to bite yet. "I'm fine," Rachel said finally, the words coming out stiff, rehearsed. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to." Tank shrugged. "Easy. Doesn't cost me anything either way. Coffee's already bought." That seemed to loosen something in her, just a little. She glanced at the cup again, longer this time. "It's just coffee," Tank added. "Gas station stuff. Nothing fancy. I'm not going to stand here and make you talk to me if you don't want to." Rachel's fingers found the window switch. She rolled it down another few inches, enough that Tank could pass one of the cups through. Their hands didn't touch. He made sure of that, keeping the exchange careful, deliberate, the kind of distance a man kept when he understood exactly how much trust he hadn't earned yet. "Thank you," Rachel said, quiet, like the words surprised her on the way out. Tank nodded and stepped back from the car, giving her room, and leaned against the light pole a few feet off, sipping his own coffee like he had nowhere else to be. The rain kept falling around them, drumming on the roof of her car, on his shoulders, on the pavement between them. Neither of them said anything for a while. He didn't ask why she was out here. He didn't ask about the house, or the man he figured was waiting up there in the window she kept glancing toward. He just stood there, letting the quiet settle, letting her have the coffee and the silence and the choice of what to do with both. After a few minutes, Rachel rolled the window up partway, then opened her car door. She stepped out slow, coffee cup cradled in both hands, and looked at him once more like she was still deciding something. "Thanks," she said again. "For the coffee." "Any time," Tank said. She walked toward the building, her steps careful on the wet pavement, and Tank watched her go, watched her disappear through the door and up the stairwell, until the light in the third-floor window flicked on above him. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and some of the weight in his chest eased. Just a little. Tank's apartment window faced the parking lot, and over the next 2 weeks, that window became a kind of post he manned without ever calling it that. He didn't think of it as watching. He told himself he was just a guy who liked to look out at the rain, or the stars, or nothing at all, while he had his evening coffee. But he knew better. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew exactly why. Most nights, Rachel's car pulled in around 6, same as anybody coming home from work. Some nights, she went straight up. Those nights, Tank let the curtain fall back into place and didn't think another thing of it. But other nights, the car would sit there. 10 minutes. 20. Once, on a Tuesday, she sat in that car for almost 2 hours, the engine ticking down to silence, the headlights long since switched off, just a shape behind the wheel in the dark. Those were the nights Tank went downstairs. He never made a show of it. He'd grab whatever he had on hand, a thermos of tea one night, a granola bar shoved in his jacket pocket another, and he'd walk out slow and easy. Same as that first rainy night, letting her see him coming from a good distance off. He'd tap the glass, hold up whatever he'd brought, and wait. Some nights she rolled the window down and took what he offered without a word. Some nights she managed a thank you, soft and quick, like the words cost her something to spend. Tank never asked her why she was sitting out there. He never asked about the man upstairs, though he'd started to notice things, the way she flinched at car doors slamming too hard, the way her eyes tracked toward the third-floor window like she was reading something written there only she could see. He filed all of it away and said nothing. He'd learned a long time ago that people told you things when they were ready, not when you decided you needed to hear them. He left a paperback on her windshield one evening, tucked under the wiper blade so it wouldn't blow away, a beat-up old Western he'd already read twice. He didn't leave a note, just the book. The next night, when she rolled her window down for the coffee he'd brought, she mentioned, almost shy about it, that she liked the ending. "Didn't peg you for a horse and cowboy sort of woman," Tank said. "I contain multitudes," Rachel said, and there was something dry in her voice, something almost like a joke, and Tank felt a small, private kind of victory at that, like watching a plant push up through cracked concrete. Tonight, the rain had held off, but the air was sharp and cold. The kind of cold that got into your knuckles. Tank came down with the thermos of tea, found her car sitting in its usual spot, the engine off, her silhouette unmoving behind the wheel. He tapped the glass. She rolled the window down without hesitation now, that part of the routine worn smooth between them. "Tea," Tank said, passing it through. "Careful. It's hot." "Thanks." She wrapped both hands around the thermos like she was trying to pull the warmth into her bones. Her eyes went to the lit window on the third floor, the same as always, and something tightened in her shoulders, small but visible, like a fist closing. "You okay?" Tank asked. He kept his voice easy, like he was asking about the weather. Rachel didn't answer for a second. She looked down at the thermos in her hands, and when she spoke, her voice came out thin and shaking, like it had slipped loose before she could stop it. "He doesn't like when dinner's late." The words hung there in the cold air between them. Rachel's eyes went wide, and her hand came up fast to press against her mouth, like she could shove the sentence back inside if she just moved quick enough. She stared at Tank, horror creeping into her face, the look of someone who just realized they'd handed a stranger a piece of glass with their own blood still on it. Tank didn't move. He didn't lean in, didn't press for more, didn't let anything on his face shift into pity or alarm, though both were sitting heavy in his chest. He just nodded once, slow and steady, like she'd told him something as simple as the time of day. "Thank you for telling me," he said. 3 days later, the sun came out for the first time in a week, and the courtyard behind the building filled up with the sound of it. Tank had his bike up on the stand, the old Harley he'd had for going on 12 years, and he was elbow-deep in the engine with Big Mike and Ronnie standing over him, tossing back beers even though it wasn't noon yet. "I'm telling you," Ronnie was saying. The guy tried to talk his way out of it by saying, "The dog started it." "The dog," Big Mike repeated, like he couldn't believe the words coming out of his own mouth. "The dog, Mike?" He looked the cop dead in the eye and said the dog started it. Tank was laughing before Ronnie even finished, that big rolling laugh that came from somewhere deep in his chest, the kind of laugh that didn't know how to be small. Big Mike lost it too, slapping his hand against the seat of Tank's bike, and the two of them got loud. The way men get loud when they've had a few beers and the sun is out, and nothing much is wrong in the world for once. Tank straightened up, wrench still in his hand, wiping grease off his forehead with the back of his wrist, still chuckling at Ronnie's story, when he caught movement out of the corner of his eye. Rachel. She was walking along the edge of the courtyard, cutting through on her way from the mailboxes, a couple of envelopes held against her chest like a shield. She must have been 10, 15 feet away when Big Mike let out a sudden bark of laughter, sharp and booming, the kind of sound that bounced off the brick walls of the building and rattled around before it faded. Rachel froze, not just stopped walking. Froze, entire body locking up mid-step, one foot still lifted like she'd been caught in a photograph. Her shoulders shot up toward her ears. The envelopes crumpled slightly in her grip. For a second, maybe less, she looked like a woman standing in the middle of a field who'd just heard a gunshot, waiting to see if the next one was coming for her. Tank's own laughter died in his throat. He watched it happen in pieces, the way her whole body seemed to shrink into itself, the way her eyes darted, quick and animal, toward the sound before she even seemed to register what it was. It wasn't the reaction of someone startled by a loud noise. Tank had seen startled plenty of times in his life. This was different. This was a body that had been trained, drilled, taught through repetition what came after a sudden loud sound in a house where you didn't know which version of a man you were going to get. Big Mike and Ronnie kept right on talking, oblivious, already off on some other story about the dog owner and the cop and a fence that got knocked down. Tank didn't hear a word of it. His eyes found Rachel's face. For just a moment, she looked back at him, and there was nothing hidden in it. Nothing she had time to smooth over or tuck away behind politeness. Tank saw it plain, the way you'd see a bruise on skin gone pale with fear, and it hit him like a fist to the sternum. She was afraid. Not of him, not of Mike, not of Ronnie, or the wrench in Tank's hand, or anything happening in that courtyard. She was afraid the way a person gets afraid when their whole body has learned that safety is not a place you get to relax in. Not really. Not ever. Not even 3 floors up in your own home with the door locked behind you. Tank had spent years learning to read that particular fear on faces that couldn't say it out loud. He'd seen it on kids sitting in the back of his old state car, knees pulled up to their chests, refusing to look at the houses they were being driven away from. He'd seen it on mothers standing in doorways, arms crossed tight over their ribs, insisting everything was fine while their eyes told an entirely different story. He was seeing it now on Rachel, standing in a sunny courtyard on an ordinary Thursday, undone by the sound of 2 grown men laughing over a joke about a dog. Rachel recovered quick, ducking her head, hurrying the rest of the way across the courtyard toward the stairwell door, disappearing inside without looking back. Big Mike and Ronnie kept talking, kept laughing, never noticing a thing. Tank stood there with the wrench going slack in his hand, the sun still warm on the back of his neck, and something inside him settled into place, quiet and absolute. The same kind of certainty he used to feel the moment before he made a decision he couldn't take back. Tonight, he'd walk her to her door tonight, and every night after that, for as long as it took. The laundry room in the basement smelled like fabric softener and old pipes, a low hum of dryers filling the small space. Rachel stood at the folding table, working through a basket of towels. When the door creaked open and Denise came in balancing a laundry basket on her hip, her daughter's small pink socks scattered on top like confetti. "Hey," Denise said, setting her basket down on the machine beside Rachel's. Didn't know anyone else did laundry on Thursdays. Rachel gave a small smile, trying to beat the weekend rush. Denise laughed, the sound easy and warm, nothing like the sharp bark that had frozen Rachel in the courtyard days before. She started loading her machine, humming under her breath, and Rachel found herself relaxing just a little, the way she sometimes did around Denise. There was something steady about her. Something that didn't ask for anything. "You talked to Tank much?" Denise asked, glancing over. Rachel's hands paused on the towel she was folding. "A little. He's been nice, walking me to my door sometimes." Denise nodded like this didn't surprise her one bit. "That's Tank." She said it simply, like commenting on the weather. Then, almost as an afterthought, tossing another sock into the machine, she added, "Tank's the reason my daughter isn't in foster care with strangers right now." Rachel went still. "What?" Denise looked up, maybe registering the weight of what she'd just said, but she didn't take it back. Instead, she leaned against the washer, arms crossed loosely, and let out a breath. It was before he lived here. Before all this. She gestured vaguely, meaning the building, the bikes, the leather vests hanging off men in the courtyard. He used to be a state social worker. Like, official, badge and everything. Tank? Rachel said again, the word coming out flat with disbelief. I know. Denise almost smiled. Hard to picture, right? But he was good at it. Real good, from what I heard. He was the one who came out to my sister's place, back when Katie was just a baby and things were bad there. Real bad. Her voice dropped a little, careful the way people got when they were choosing which pieces of a story to hand over and which to keep folded up small. There wasn't time to do it the right way, with the paperwork and the warrants and all that. Tank made a call. Went in and got her out that night. No warrant, nothing official backing him up. Saved her life, probably, but it cost him everything. They pulled his badge. Ended his whole career over it. Rachel stood there with a towel forgotten in her hands, the dryer behind her thumping in slow, steady rhythm. He never talks about it, Denise added, softer now. You'd never know unless somebody told you. But that's why the angels took him in. After, he didn't have anywhere else to go. State turned its back on him for doing the one thing that actually mattered. She shrugged, like she was finishing a story she'd told 100 times before, one that had long since stopped surprising her. Anyway, that's Tank. The dryer buzzed, signaling the end of a cycle, and Denise turned to pull her clothes out, chattering on about something else now. About her daughter's daycare. About the weather. Rachel barely heard any of it. She folded the rest of her towels on autopilot, her mind turning over what she'd just been told like a stone she couldn't stop touching. She said goodbye to Denise a few minutes later, and climbed the stairs back up to her floor in a kind of daze, the laundry basket heavy and forgotten in her arms. Back in her apartment, she set the basket down on the counter and stood there a long moment, staring at nothing. Every night Tank had appeared at her window. Every night he'd walked those careful few steps behind her, never crowding her, never asking her a single question she wasn't ready to answer. The granola bar left outside her door, the paperback he'd handed her without comment, the way he never once made her feel like she owed him an explanation. It wasn't random. It wasn't just some big man with a soft spot for a scared woman. It was who he was. Down to the bone. He had done this before, had walked into something broken and made a choice that cost him everything, and he was doing it again now. Slower. Quieter. Careful not to make the same mistake twice. That night, Rachel sat in her car in the parking lot, the engine ticking as it cooled, the light in her window on the third floor glowing steady and yellow. She watched it the way she always did, waiting, dreading, running through the excuses she'd give Craig for being 5 minutes later than she should have been. But something had shifted. She thought of Tank walking those careful steps behind her. She thought of a night years ago. A child he didn't know. A decision he made anyway. She sat with her hands on the wheel and into the empty car, quiet as breath. She whispered, "I can't keep doing this." The evening air had a bite to it, the kind that promised fall was almost over and winter was coming to take its place. Tank came out of the building the way he always did, 2 coffees in hand, steam curling up from the little holes in the plastic lids. He was already thinking about which window he'd see her car parked under, already bracing himself for the familiar walk across the lot. But tonight, before he'd even crossed halfway, her window rolled down. He stopped walking for a second. Just a second. Rachel had never done that before. She always waited, always let him come to her, like she needed to see his hands first, see that he wasn't carrying anything but coffee and patience. He came the rest of the way and leaned down slightly, resting one arm on the roof of her car. "Can we talk somewhere Craig won't see us?" Rachel asked. Her voice was quiet, but it wasn't shaking the way it usually did. There was something steadier underneath it, like a plank laid across a gap that used to just be empty air. Tank looked at her for a moment. Really looked. The way he used to look at kids in doorways all those years ago, reading the things they weren't saying yet. Then he nodded. "There's a bench," he said. "Far side of the lot. By the fence. Can't see it from your window." Rachel turned off her engine. The car went quiet, that long tick of cooling metal starting up right away, familiar as a heartbeat. She got out, coffee still in Tank's hand waiting for her, and together they walked across the cracked pavement, past the row of parked cars and the dumpster and the flickering lamp that had never worked right since Rachel moved in. The bench was old, wood gray and split in places, but it held their weight fine. Tank handed her the coffee and sat down beside her, leaving space, always leaving space, like he'd learned a long time ago that closeness had to be earned 1 inch at a time. For a while, neither of them said anything. Rachel wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, letting the warmth soak into her fingers. Somewhere across the lot, a dog barked twice and went quiet. "Denise told me about you," Rachel finally said. "About the little girl. About what happened to your job." Tank's jaw tightened, just barely, but he didn't look away from her. "She shouldn't have. She wasn't gossiping," Rachel said quickly. "I don't think she even meant to. It just came out." She looked down at the coffee. "I'm glad she did." Tank didn't answer that, just waited, the way he always did, giving her room to keep going or stop. And Rachel kept going. "Craig wasn't always like this," she started, her voice low, careful, like she was testing each word before she let it out into the open air. "In the beginning, he was sweet. Attentive, he wanted to know where I was all the time, but I thought that meant he cared." She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Turns out, it just meant he wanted to know where I was." Tank stayed still, his hands loose on his knees, his eyes steady on her. "He didn't like my friends," she went on. "Said they were a bad influence, said they didn't really care about me the way he did. Then it was my sister. Then my mom. Every time I talked to somebody, he'd find a reason it bothered him, until eventually it was just easier not to call anybody at all." Her voice cracked slightly there, and she took a breath, steadying it. "I don't even have anybody's number memorized anymore. I used to know my mom's number by heart. Now I don't even know if it's the same." She looked up at the window on the 3rd floor, the one glowing yellow even from here, even from this distance. "I'm scared all the time," she said. "Not like jump at loud noises scared, though that too. I mean, it's just always there. In my chest, like something sitting on me that never gets up." Tank listened to all of it, without a single interruption, without a single flicker of judgment crossing his face. When she finally stopped, wrung out and quiet, he let the silence sit for a moment before he spoke. "You're not stuck," he said. "You have options. And when you're ready, I'll help however I can." 2 days later, the sun was out for the first time in a week, thin and pale, but real. Tank was in the courtyard doing what he usually did on a slow afternoon, working on his bike, a rag tucked into his back pocket, his big hands black with grease. The Angels called this spot the courtyard like it was something fancy, but it was really just a cracked slab of concrete between the buildings with 2 dead planters and a bike rack nobody used. He heard footsteps coming across the pavement and looked up, expecting one of the guys. Instead, it was Rachel. She'd never come to him in daylight before, never in the open, where anyone looking out a window might see. Tank set down the rag slow, giving her time to change her mind if she needed to, but she kept walking until she was standing right in front of him, arms wrapped around herself even though it wasn't that cold. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice easy, like this was any other day. "Hey," Rachel said back. She glanced toward the building once, quick, like a reflex, then made herself look at him instead. "I need to talk to you. For real. Not just at night, not just in the parking lot." Tank wiped his hands on the rag and gave her his full attention. "Okay," Rachel took a breath, the kind that shook a little on the way in but came out steadier. "I've decided. I'm leaving him." The words hung there in the courtyard air, plain and simple, but Tank could see what they cost her. Her chin was up, but her eyes were scared, the kind of scared that comes from saying a thing out loud for the first time and realizing you can't take it back now that it's out. "Good," Tank said. Quiet but firm. "That's good, Rachel. It doesn't feel good," she said, and her voice cracked just slightly. "It feels like standing at the edge of something with no idea what's underneath." She looked down at her own hands, twisting together in front of her. "I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have any money saved. Not really. He's got all of it in accounts I can't touch without him knowing. I don't have family close by anymore, not since he pushed everybody out. I don't even know what I'd do for the first night, let alone the next one after that." Tank listened to all of it, same as he always did, letting her get every bit of it out before he said a word. "I know it's a lot to ask," Rachel went on, quieter now, like the fear was catching up to her. "I know you've already done so much just walking me to my door every night, but I didn't know who else to say this to." "You're not asking too much," Tank said. "Not even close." He set the rag down on the seat of the bike and stood up straighter, wiping the last of the grease off his palms like he was clearing space to think properly. "There's a spare room," he said. "Denise's place." Her roommate moved out a couple months back, took a job in Ohio. She's had that room sitting empty since, hasn't found anybody she wants living with her. Rachel's eyes came up to meet his, something flickering there that hadn't been there a second ago. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of it. "You think she'd let me stay there?" Rachel asked. "I think she'd say yes before I even finished asking," Tank said. "But I'll talk to her tonight, make sure. Won't say more than I need to. Just that you need a place, and that it'd mean something to me if she could help." Rachel nodded, slow at first, then a little firmer. Her arms were still wrapped around herself, but her shoulders had come down some, like a weight had shifted, even if it hadn't lifted all the way yet. "Okay," she said. "Okay, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Tank said. "Let's see what she says first." Rachel nodded again, and for a moment neither of them said anything else. Then she turned, glancing once more at the third-floor window before she started back across the courtyard toward the building, her steps careful but certain, like she was walking toward something instead of just away from it. That evening, Tank climbed the 2 flights of stairs to Denise's apartment, his boots heavy on the worn carpet. He'd changed his shirt, washed the grease off his hands twice, though he wasn't sure why that mattered for a conversation like this one. He knocked, 3 solid raps, and waited. Denise opened the door with a dish towel over her shoulder and a toddler balanced on her hip. The boy's small fist wrapped around a plastic spoon he was gnawing on like it owed him money. She smiled when she saw who it was. "Tank," she said. "This is a surprise. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he said. "You got a minute?" "Sure, come on in, but excuse the mess." She stepped back to let him through, shifting the boy to her other hip. The apartment smelled like dish soap and something warm baking, and toys were scattered across the living room floor in the organized chaos of a place where a small child lived and was loved. Tank stayed standing near the door, hands in his jacket pockets, feeling bigger and rougher than the space around him. "I want to ask you something," he said. "About that spare room. The one your roommate left." Denise's eyebrows lifted. She set the toddler down on the carpet, and he immediately crawled toward a pile of blocks, losing interest in the adults entirely. "You looking for a place, Tank?" "Not for me." He rubbed the back of his neck. "For somebody else. A friend." Denise studied him for a second, and something in her face shifted, like she was already putting pieces together before he'd given her any. "This friend got a name?" she asked, though her voice was gentle, not pushing. "Rachel," Tank said. "Third floor. I don't know how much you've seen of her, but she's been going through something. I'm not going to tell you all of it, because it's not mine to tell. But she needs a place to stay. Somewhere safe, somewhere that isn't where she's been." Denise didn't say anything right away. She walked over to the counter, picked up a mug of coffee that had probably gone cold an hour ago, and held it without drinking from it, like it gave her something to do with her hands while she thought. "I've seen her," Denise said finally. "In the parking lot. In the hallway. She's got this way of walking, real careful, like she's trying not to make a sound." She looked at Tank. "I noticed her car sitting out there some nights. Wondered about it. Didn't think it was my business to ask." "It wasn't," Tank said. "Still isn't. Not really. But she's ready to leave. Her husband. And she doesn't have anywhere to go." Denise set the mug down and crossed her arms, but not in a defensive way. More like she was hugging herself while she thought it through, the same way Rachel did sometimes. "You know," she said slowly, when Micah was taken away from his dad, back before I even had custody sorted out proper, "there was a woman at the shelter who let me stay in her spare room for 2 weeks. Didn't ask me a single question I wasn't ready to answer. Just gave me a bed and let me breathe." She looked at Tank. "That's you too, isn't it? You did something like that for me, way back. Helped get Micah out." Tank didn't say anything, just gave a small nod, like it wasn't something he wanted to take credit for. "Yes," Denise said, before he could even finish the thought. "Yes, she can have the room. Whenever she wants it. Today, tomorrow, doesn't matter." Relief moved through Tank's chest, loosening something that had been tight since Rachel first said the words, "I'm leaving him in the courtyard." "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot." "Don't thank me," Denise said, echoing something Tank himself might have said. "I've been wondering for months if something was wrong with that girl. Kept meaning to say hello properly, but she always looked like she was trying to disappear into the wallpaper." She sat down on the arm of the couch, watching her son stack blocks that kept toppling over. "How do we tell her? I don't want her to feel like we've been talking about her behind her back, even though I guess we have been." "Careful," Tank said. "Slow, maybe you knock on her door tomorrow, casual like, Invite her for coffee. Let her come to it in her own time. Denise nodded. Tomorrow then, she said. We'll do it gentle. The next morning, Rachel knocked on Denise's door at 10:15, holding a mug of coffee she hadn't finished, more for something to hold than anything else. She'd almost turned around twice on the way down the hall. Craig wouldn't be home until 6. She knew that for a fact he'd told her the schedule himself like he always did, like he needed her to know exactly where he was at all times, and exactly when he'd be back to check on where she'd been. But even with hours of safety stretched out in front of her, her hands still shook a little when she raised them to knock. Denise opened the door fast, like she'd been waiting right on the other side of it. Hey, Denise said, smiling. Come in, come in. Micah's down for his nap, so we've got some quiet. The apartment looked different in the daylight than it had the few times Rachel had glimpsed it from the hallway. Sunlight came through the windows in long yellow strips, falling across a rug scattered with wooden blocks. It smelled like coffee and crayons. Rachel sat down on the edge of the couch like she wasn't sure she was allowed to sit all the way back into it. I wanted to talk to you about something, Denise said, sitting across from her in the armchair, elbows on her knees. And I want you to know, nobody's trying to push you into anything. If you want to tell me to mind my own business, that's fine too. Rachel's stomach tightened. Okay, she said quietly. I've got a spare room, Denise said. My old roommate moved out a few months back, and I haven't found anybody to take her spot. It's small, but it's got a bed, a dresser, a door that locks. She paused. It's yours if you want it. Whenever you want it. Today, next week, doesn't matter. For a moment, Rachel just sat there, staring at her coffee like the words hadn't reached her yet. Then something in her chest cracked open, and before she could stop it, she was crying, really crying, her shoulders shaking, both hands coming up to cover her face like she was ashamed of it. I'm sorry, she managed to say between breaths. I'm sorry, I don't know why Don't apologize, Denise said gently, sliding off the chair to kneel in front of her, not touching her, just close. You don't have to apologize for that. Not here. Rachel cried harder at that, the kind of crying that comes up from somewhere old, somewhere that's been locked down for years. Nobody had offered her anything without expecting something back in years. Nobody had said it's yours about anything. Thank you, Rachel finally whispered, wiping at her face with the sleeve of her cardigan. Thank you. I don't know how to. You don't have to know how, Denise said. You just have to say yes. Yes, Rachel said, and laughed a little through the tears, a strange wet sound. Yes, okay. Yes, there was a knock at the door then, 3 solid raps, and Denise got up to answer it. Tank stood in the hallway, and when he saw Rachel's red eyes he went still for half a second, worry flashing across his face before Denise waved him in. Good tears, Denise said. She said yes. Tank let out a breath and stepped inside, taking off his jacket like he meant to stay a while. Good, he said. That's real good. The 3 of them sat down together, and it was Tank who got practical first, the way he always did when things needed doing. There's a diner on 5th, he said. My friend Marie runs it. She's a good woman, she'll treat you fair, and she's looking for help. I can put in a word if you want it. Rachel nodded, still catching her breath. I'd like that. And for moving your things, Tank continued, we do it on a day Craig's out of town. No sense doing it while he's around. He's got that trip, Rachel said slowly, thinking, Tuesday, he leaves Monday night, doesn't come back till Wednesday. Tuesday then, Tank said, and Denise nodded beside him, already reaching for a pen to write it down. The diner sat on the corner of 5th Street, its windows fogged from the morning heat inside, a red sign that said Marie's in letters that had faded from years of sun. Rachel stood across the street from it for a long moment before she made herself cross. The blazer Denise had lent her didn't fit quite right. It was a little big in the shoulders, and Rachel kept tugging at the sleeves as she walked, like if she pulled hard enough it might shrink to fit. She'd tried on 3 different outfits that morning in Denise's bedroom mirror, turning this way and that, asking Denise the same question over and over. Does this look okay? Do I look okay? You look like someone who's about to get a job, Denise had told her, and pushed her out the door before she could ask again. Now, standing outside the diner with her hand on the cold metal door handle, Rachel ran through the answers in her head one more time. Why do you want to work here? Tell me about your experience. What are your strengths? She hadn't worked in almost 4 years. Craig had made sure of that, first gently, then not so gently, until the idea of a job had become something she used to have. Back before, like a language she'd forgotten how to speak. She pushed the door open. A bell jingled above her head. The diner was warm and smelled like coffee and bacon grease, homey in a way that made something in Rachel's chest loosen just slightly. A few early lunch customers sat scattered at booths, and behind the counter stood a woman with graying hair pulled back in a clip, sturdy forearms, and eyes that moved to Rachel the second the bell rang, quick and assessing but not unkind. "You must be Rachel," the woman said, wiping her hands on her apron and coming around the counter. "I'm Marie. Tank said you'd be by." "Yes," Rachel said. "Hi, thank you for seeing me. Come on back," Marie said, gesturing toward a booth near the kitchen. "We'll talk while it's slow." Rachel slid into the booth, her hands folding themselves in her lap the way they always did now, like she needed to keep them still and out of the way. Marie sat across from her, not with a clipboard or a list of questions, just her own cup of coffee, which she pushed toward Rachel without asking if she wanted it. "So," Marie said. "Tank tells me you're looking for work." "Yes, ma'am," Rachel said, and then immediately felt foolish for the ma'am, like she was talking to a teacher. "I mean, yes I am." "You ever waitress before?" "A little. In college." "It's been a while." Marie nodded slowly, studying her, and Rachel felt the urge to fill the silence, the old habit of over-explaining, of making herself smaller and more agreeable before anyone could find a reason to be upset with her. "I know it's been a long time," Rachel started, "and I know I probably don't have the kind of experience you're looking for, but I learn fast, and I'd work really hard. And I wouldn't be late, I promise, Rachel," Marie said, gently cutting her off. "Take a breath." Rachel stopped. She hadn't realized her voice had climbed, hadn't realized her hands had started twisting together in her lap. Marie's eyes softened, and for a moment she looked at Rachel the way you might look at something fragile you didn't want to startle. She didn't ask what had happened to her. She didn't ask about Craig, or the apartment, or why a grown woman was sitting across from her rehearsing apologies for things she hadn't even done yet. She just reached over and patted the table once, like punctuation. "Here's the thing," Marie said. "I don't need you to have 10 years of experience. I need somebody who'll show up, treat my customers right, and not steal from the register. That's about it." Rachel let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "I can do that. I know you can," Marie said, and there was something certain in the way she said it, something that made Rachel believe it a little herself. "You can start Thursday." 6 a.m., if that works. We'll get you an apron, show you the ropes. Really? Rachel felt her eyes sting, and she blinked hard against it, not wanting to cry in front of a woman she'd just met. Just like that? Marie shrugged, like it was the simplest thing in the world. We look out for our own around here. Rachel walked out of the diner 10 minutes later with a start date, a promise of an apron, and a strange, unfamiliar feeling rising in her chest, something she almost didn't recognize anymore. It felt something like hope. Tuesday morning came in gray and quiet, the kind of light that made everything look like it was holding its breath. Rachel stood in the middle of the living room, a roll of trash bags in one hand, her heart going so fast she could feel it in her throat. Craig had left for his business trip at 5 that morning. She'd watched from the bedroom window as his car pulled out of the lot, watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner, and even then she'd waited another 10 minutes before she let herself believe he was really gone. You okay? Denise asked, coming in through the front door with a stack of flattened boxes under her arm. Tank was right behind her, ducking his head slightly to fit through the doorway, filling up the small apartment with his broad shoulders and his quiet, steady presence. I'm okay, Rachel said, though her hands were shaking as she pulled a trash bag open. Let's just be fast. Please, let's just be really fast. We got you, Tank said. His voice was low, even, just tell us what goes and what stays. You don't gotta think too hard about it. If you're not sure, it stays. Rachel nodded and started moving. She went for her clothes first, sweeping armfuls of shirts and sweaters off their hangers and into bags, not bothering to fold anything. Denise worked beside her in the bedroom, wrapping the few photo frames Rachel owned in dish towels and packing them careful and quick into a box. Tank took the kitchen, boxing up the mismatched dishes that had been Rachel's grandmother's, the ones Craig always complained didn't match anything. Every sound in the building made Rachel flinch. A door slammed somewhere above them and she froze mid-motion, a sweater clutched to her chest, eyes wide. That's just the Hendersons, Denise said gently. 3rd floor. Their doors always sticking. Rachel let out a breath and kept moving, but a few minutes later the pipes groaned in the wall, an old building sound she'd heard 1,000 times before, and she jumped again, nearly dropping the box in her arms. It's just the pipes, Tank said from the kitchen doorway, not even looking up from what he was doing, like he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Old building. Does that every morning around this time. I know, Rachel said, and laughed a little, a shaky, embarrassed sound. I know. I keep thinking he's going to walk through the door. He's not, Tank said. But if he did, you got me and Denise here. You're not by yourself in this. Not anymore. Something in Rachel's chest loosened at that, just enough for her to keep going. They worked through the morning without stopping much, boxes filling up faster than Rachel expected. It was strange, she thought, how little of her own life fit into so few containers. 4 years of marriage, and it all came down to some clothes, a few books, her grandmother's dishes, a shoebox of photographs Craig had never let her hang on the walls. By noon, Tank was carrying the last of the boxes down to his truck, his arms straining under the weight, his boots heavy on the stairs. Denise did one last sweep of the bathroom, checking drawers, making sure nothing got left behind. Rachel stood in the kitchen a moment longer, looking at the space where the table used to be, where she'd sat so many nights rehearsing apologies for things that weren't her fault. That's everything, Tank said, coming back up one last time, slightly out of breath. You want to check the bedroom again? Rachel shook her head. No. I checked twice already. They walked out together, and Tank went ahead down the stairs to load the last box into the truck bed, giving her space, the way he always did. Rachel stood alone in the doorway of the apartment for a moment, looking back at the empty rooms, the bare walls, the carpet still showing the indent marks of furniture that wasn't there anymore. It didn't feel like her home. She wasn't sure it ever really had. She took a breath, shaky and long, and let it out slow. Then she reached for the door handle and pulled it shut behind her, the click of the lock final and small and enormous all at once. Down in the parking lot, Tank stood by the truck, waiting, patient as ever, the last box already loaded, the afternoon sun breaking weakly through the clouds behind him. The spare room at Denise's place was small, but Rachel stood in the doorway that evening and thought it was the most beautiful room she had ever seen. The walls were a soft yellow, the color of the inside of a lemon. There was a single window that looked out over the parking lot, a dresser with a wobbly leg, and a bed frame with no mattress yet. Just the box spring waiting there like a promise. Sorry it's not much, Denise said, coming in behind her with a stack of folded sheets in her arms. I've had these packed away for a while now. Was waiting for the right time to use them. You knew, Rachel said quietly. Before I even asked. You already had sheets ready. Denise shrugged, a little embarrassed. I hoped. That's different than knowing. But yeah. I had a feeling this day might come, and I wanted to be ready when it did. Rachel didn't know what to say to that, so she just took one end of the fitted sheet and helped Denise stretch it over the mattress that Marie's husband had dropped off that afternoon in the back of his truck, still wrapped in plastic. They worked together, tucking corners, smoothing wrinkles, and it was such a small, ordinary thing, but Rachel felt her throat go tight anyway. Nobody had ever made a bed for her before. Not like this. Not with this kind of care. These are nice, Rachel said, running her hand over the sheets. They were a pale blue, soft and worn from washing, the kind of soft that only comes with age and use. They were my sister's, Denise said. She passed a few years back. I kept some of her things. Feels right, giving them to someone who needs a fresh start. Rachel didn't ask more, and Denise didn't offer more, and that was all right. Some stories didn't need telling all at once. They ordered a pizza from the place down the street, the same one Denise always ordered from, and when it arrived, they sat on the floor of the spare room because there wasn't a table in there yet, eating straight out of the box, paper towels for napkins, a single lamp glowing warm in the corner since the overhead light hadn't been hooked up. This is the best pizza I've ever had, Rachel said, and she meant it, even though it was just cheese and pepperoni from a place that probably wasn't anything special. Denise laughed. It's the same pizza everybody gets. I know, Rachel said. But it tastes different tonight. They talked for a while about nothing important. Denise told her about her daughter's school play coming up. Some story about a boy in her class named Mikey, who kept forgetting his lines. Rachel found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in longer than she could remember. It felt strange in her chest, like a muscle she'd forgotten how to use. By the time they finished unpacking the last box, the one with Rachel's clothes still smelling faintly of the old apartment, it was late. Denise hung a few shirts in the small closet, and Rachel set her grandmother's dishes on top of the dresser, just to have them somewhere she could see them. You need anything else tonight? Denise asked from the doorway, the pizza box tucked under one arm to throw away. "No," Rachel said. "Thank you. For everything. I don't know how to say thank you enough." "You don't have to say anything," Denise said. "Just get some sleep." "Good night, Rachel. Good night." The door clicked shut, soft and easy, nothing like the sound of her old apartment door. Rachel turned off the lamp and climbed into the bed, the sheets cool and smooth against her skin, the mattress still a little stiff from being new. She lay there in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, waiting. She waited for the tightness to come, the way it always did at night, the familiar knot low in her stomach that came from years of listening for footsteps, for the sound of a key in a lock, for a voice that might be calm or might not be. She waited for her mind to start running through excuses, apologies, the things she might have done wrong that day. But it didn't come. There was only the quiet hum of the refrigerator down the hall, and the soft sound of Denise's daughter's nightlight glowing under the door across the way, and the stillness of a house where nobody was angry, where nobody was waiting to be disappointed in her. Rachel closed her eyes. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she slept, deep and whole and unafraid, all the way through the night. The days took on a shape Rachel hadn't felt in years, a shape that made sense. She woke early now, before her alarm most mornings, the sun coming through the yellow walls and turning the whole room the color of honey. She'd pull on the black polo shirt Marie had given her, the one with Diamond's Diner stitched over the pocket in red thread, and she'd walk the 6 blocks to work, because the walking felt good, felt like something she was choosing instead of something being done to her. The diner smelled like coffee and bacon grease and burnt toast, and Rachel learned the rhythm of it fast. Table 4 wanted their eggs over easy, not over medium, and if you got it wrong, they'd send it back with a sigh, but no real anger. The coffee pot needed refilling before anyone asked. Old Man Petey always tipped in exact change, and always said you're a good girl on his way out. And the first time he said it, Rachel had to turn around and blink hard at the pie case so nobody would see her eyes water. Marie ran the place like she ran everything else, with a loud voice and a soft heart hidden somewhere underneath the bossing. She corrected Rachel without making her feel small, showed her how to carry 3 plates up one arm, how to talk to the truckers who came through so they'd leave a good tip without ever making Rachel feel like she owed them a smile she didn't want to give. "You're a natural," Marie told her at the end of her first week, counting bills into an envelope. "Some people take months to get the hang of this place. You got it in days." Rachel didn't know what to say to that, so she just held the envelope like it might disappear if she squeezed too hard. That first paycheck sat on the dresser in Denise's spare room for 2 whole days before Rachel could bring herself to open the bank account Marie had helped her set up. She stood in line at the bank with her identification and her nervous hands, and when the teller handed her a slip of paper with a real number on it, a number that belonged only to her, Rachel had to step outside and sit on the curb for a minute, just to breathe. It was money nobody could take from her. Money Craig hadn't approved. Money that existed because of her own 2 hands and her own 2 feet walking 6 blocks every morning. She used some of it to buy a phone, a cheap one, prepaid, the kind you could get without anybody co-signing anything. And with that phone, sitting on the edge of her new bed one night, she did something she'd wanted to do for months, but hadn't had the courage for. She called her cousin Sarah. They hadn't spoken in almost 3 years. Craig had never said she couldn't call Sarah, not outright, but he'd made every visit so uncomfortable, so full of pointed comments afterward about how long she'd been on the phone or what she and Sarah could possibly have to talk about, that eventually Rachel had just stopped trying. It was easier that way. Everything had always been easier if she just stopped trying. Sarah picked up on the third ring, and when she heard Rachel's voice, she went quiet for a second, and then said, "Oh my God. Rachel, I've thought about you every single day." They talked for 2 hours that night. Rachel didn't tell her everything, not yet, but she told her enough. Sarah cried a little. Rachel cried a little. By the end of it, they'd made plans to meet for coffee the next week. Actual plans, written down on a piece of paper Rachel taped to the inside of her closet door so she wouldn't lose it. It was Marie who brought up the cookout. On a slow Tuesday afternoon when the diner was empty except for the two of them wiping down the counters. "Saturday, at the clubhouse," Marie said, not looking up from the counter. "Nothing fancy. Burgers, some music, the kids running around. You should come." Rachel's first instinct was to say no, to make an excuse the way she used to make excuses for Craig. But she caught herself. "I don't really know anybody there," she said instead. "You know me. You know Tank. You know Denise. That's more than most people got when they showed up their first time." Marie finally looked at her, steady and kind. "We look out for our own, Rachel. You're one of our own now, whether you feel it yet or not." Rachel folded her rag slowly, thinking it over. "Okay," she said. "I'll come." The clubhouse sat at the edge of town, a long, low building with a gravel lot full of motorcycles lined up like a row of gleaming, growling animals asleep in the sun. Rachel stood at the edge of the lot for a second too long, her hands wrapped around the strap of her purse, watching the crowd of leather jackets and loud laughter spilling out from a set of open garage doors. She almost turned around. Then Denise spotted her from across the lot and waved both arms over her head like she was flagging down a plane. "Rachel. Over here." There was no turning around after that. Denise pulled her by the elbow into the crowd, past men with beards and tattoos who nodded at her like she was already supposed to be there. Past a folding table piled with hamburger buns and bags of chips, past a cooler somebody had propped open with a brick. The smell of grilling meat hung thick in the air, mixing with the smoke from the fire pit and the sweet smell of somebody's cigar. "You made it," Marie said, appearing with a spatula in one hand and an apron tied twice around her waist. "Good. Get yourself a plate before Tiny eats all the burgers again." "Hey now," a huge man by the grill said without turning around. That was one time. "It's been 3 times, Tiny," the group of women laughed, and Rachel found herself laughing too. A small surprised sound that felt strange coming out of her own mouth. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that, easy and unplanned, without checking first to see if it was the right time or the right amount. She sat with Denise and Marie and 2 other women, angel wives whose names she was still learning, at a picnic table with a red checkered cloth taped down at the corners. They told stories about the club. About husbands who couldn't parallel park a motorcycle to save their lives, about a Thanksgiving where somebody's turkey caught fire and the whole chapter had eaten sandwiches instead. Rachel listened, and then, slowly, she started talking too. Little things at first. A story about Old Man Petey and his exact change, a joke about the diner's temperamental milkshake machine. Nobody flinched at her jokes. Nobody corrected her tone or told her she was talking too loud or too much. They just laughed along with her, and Rachel felt something loosen in her chest. Something that had been tight for so long, she'd forgotten it could feel any other way. The sun dropped low and orange over the gravel lot, and somebody turned on a string of lights hung along the garage roof, and a radio somewhere played classic rock low enough to talk over. Kids ran between the motorcycles, shrieking with the kind of joy that only came from being told, again and again, that this was a safe place to run. Rachel watched them and thought about what it might be like to have grown up somewhere like this. She was still smiling when Tank found her, sitting near the fire pit with a paper plate balanced on her knees, a burger half-eaten in front of her. He didn't sit down right away. He stood there for a second, broad shoulders blocking some of the firelight, and held something small and wrapped in newspaper out toward her, like he wasn't quite sure how to hand it over. "Got you something," he said. Rachel set her plate down and took it from him carefully. The newspaper was folded around something small and hard, and when she pulled the paper away, 2 keys sat in her palm on a plain metal ring, still a little cold from wherever he'd been keeping them. "Denise gave me her spare set," Tank said. "Figured it was time you had your own, not a copy of somebody else's." "Yours." Rachel looked down at the keys, then up at him, and something in her throat closed up tight. "Tank," she started, and then couldn't finish it. She didn't think about it. She just stood up and hugged him, quick and fierce, her arms barely reaching around his broad frame, her face pressed for 1 second against the leather of his jacket. "Thank you," she said into his shoulder. "For all of it. For every single night." Tank patted her back once, awkward and gentle, the way a man pats something he's afraid might break. "You did the hard part," he said. "I just walked you to the door." Around them, the fire crackled, and the string lights swayed a little in the evening breeze, and somewhere behind them Marie was hollering at Tiny about the burgers again, and Rachel stood there holding her own set of keys, feeling, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like she was exactly where she belonged. 3 days after the cookout, Rachel was wiping down the counter at the diner when the bell over the door jingled and her whole body went cold before she even looked up. Craig stood in the doorway, still in his work clothes, tie loosened, jaw tight in the way she knew meant trouble. He wasn't supposed to know where she was. Nobody was supposed to know. "Well," he said, loud enough that the 2 men at the counter turned to look. "There she is." Rachel's hand froze on the rag. The coffee pot in her other hand suddenly felt too heavy to hold. "Craig," her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "You can't be here." "Can't be here?" He laughed, but there was nothing funny in it. "I'm your husband, Rachel. I can go anywhere I want." He walked further into the diner, and she noticed the way his eyes swept over the place, cataloging it, the way he used to catalog her, looking for something to criticize. A few of the regulars had gone quiet, watching. "How did you find me?" she asked, setting the coffee pot down before her shaking hand dropped it. "Wasn't hard." His mouth twisted into something that wasn't a smile. "Turns out your friend Denise has a big mouth. Or her coworker does. And I hear you've got yourself a new friend too, a biker." He said the word like it tasted bad. "That's real classy, Rachel, real classy, running off to live with some criminal. He's not a criminal." The words came out before she could stop them, sharper than she expected. "Oh, he's not?" Craig stepped closer to the counter. "You defending him now?" "That's rich. You couldn't even defend yourself for 6 years, but you'll stand up for some biker trash you've known a month." That's enough." Marie's voice cut through the diner like a blade. She came around from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes hard and steady on Craig in a way that made him take an actual step back. "You need to leave," Marie said. "Now, this isn't your business, lady. It's my diner." Marie's voice didn't rise. But it didn't need to. "And that makes it my business. You're upsetting my customers, and you're upsetting my employee. So you're going to walk out that door, or I'm going to call the police and let them walk you out." Craig's eyes flicked between Marie and Rachel, and for a second, Rachel thought he might actually push it further. Then he straightened his tie, gave a short, ugly laugh, and looked at Rachel one last time. "This isn't over," he said quietly, "just for her." Then he turned and walked out, the bell jingling cheerfully behind him like nothing had happened at all. The diner stayed quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, the regulars went back to their coffee, and Marie put a hand on Rachel's shoulder. "You okay, honey?" Rachel nodded, though her hands were still shaking, and she didn't trust her voice enough to answer out loud. That night, sitting on the edge of her bed in Denise's spare room, Rachel finally picked up her phone and called Tank. He answered on the second ring. "He found me," she said before he could even say hello. "Craig. He came to the diner today." She told him everything, her voice cracking in places she didn't expect, the words tumbling out faster than she meant them to. Tank listened without interrupting, and when she finished, there was a pause before he spoke. "You're safe," he said, his voice steady and low. "Marie handled it right, and you did too. You didn't back down." "I'm scared, Tank. I know." He didn't try to talk her out of the fear, didn't tell her she was being dramatic, and something about that honesty made it easier to breathe. "But you're not alone in this. Not anymore." On his end of the phone, Tank sat in his dim kitchen, his jaw tight, a knot forming low in his stomach that he didn't let bleed into his voice. Men like Craig didn't like losing control, and men who didn't like losing control didn't always know when to stop. "Rachel," he said. "If he contacts you again, calls you, shows up anywhere, anything at all, you call me right away. Don't wait. Don't think about whether it's a big deal. You call me first." "Okay," she whispered. "I will." 2 days later, Tank was in the garage under his apartment building, elbow deep in the engine of his Harley, when his phone buzzed against the workbench. He wiped his hands on a rag before picking it up, expecting Rachel's number. Instead, it was one he didn't recognize. "Morrison," he answered. "Mr. Morrison, this is Detective Alan Reyes with the County Police Department. I need you to come down to the station this afternoon. There's a complaint that's been filed, and we need to ask you some questions." Tank's hand went still on the rag. "A complaint about what?" "We can discuss the details when you get here. Would 2 o'clock work for you?" There was a careful, practiced neutrality in the detective's voice, the kind Tank recognized from his own years asking hard questions of scared people. It was the voice you used when you didn't want someone to panic before they even walked through the door. It didn't work on him. His stomach had already dropped straight through the floor. 2 o'clock, Tank said. "I'll be there." He hung up and stood in the garage for a long moment, the wrench still in his hand, staring at nothing. 15 years of careful living. 15 years of showing up, following rules, never giving anyone a single reason to look at him twice. All of it sitting on a shelf that could come crashing down with one phone call, one report, One bad word from the wrong person. He knew, before he even walked through the station doors, who was behind it. The station was cold and fluorescent, the kind of place that made everyone look guilty under the lights, whether they were or not. Tank sat in a small interview room across from Detective Reyes, a lean man in his 50s with tired eyes and a manila folder in front of him that he hadn't opened yet. "Mr. Morrison, thanks for coming in." Reyes folded his hands on the table. "I want to be straightforward with you. A man named Craig Doyle came in 2 days ago and filed a report against you. He's alleging that you've been stalking his wife, Rachel Doyle, and that you've been manipulating her, isolating her from him, using your position and your affiliations to control her." Tank felt the words land like a fist to the chest. "That's not true. None of that's true. I figured you'd say that." Reyes opened the folder, glancing over the pages inside. "But I have to tell you, Miss Morrison, given your record and given your affiliation with the Hells Angels, this isn't something we can just wave off." Mr. Doyle painted a pretty detailed picture. Nightly visits to her car, walking her to her door, gifts left for her. He's calling it a pattern of predatory behavior. I was making sure she got inside safe. Tank's voice stayed level, but his jaw was tight enough to ache. That's all it ever was. She was sitting in that parking lot every night, too scared to go up to her own apartment. I didn't push her for anything. I never asked her a single question she didn't want to answer. I believe you might be telling me the truth. Reyes's eyes were steady, not unkind, but not convinced either. But I've got a report on my desk, and I've got your file that shows you're on parole from an old charge. That complicates things. A lot. If this office decides there's enough here to escalate, that parole status could be revoked while this gets sorted out. You understand what I'm telling you? Tank understood exactly. His hands, resting on the table, curled slowly into fists before he made himself relax them. 15 years of rebuilding his life, brick by careful brick, and it could all come apart, because a bitter, controlling man wanted to punish his wife for leaving him. I never touched her wrong, Tank said quietly. I never did anything but make sure she was safe. I hear you. Reyes closed the folder. We're going to need to look into it further. I'd ask you not to leave town, and I'd ask you not to have any contact with Mrs. Doyle until this is resolved. Tank nodded once, his throat tight, and stood when the detective did. He walked out of the station into the gray afternoon light, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, his mind racing through everything he stood to lose. The parking lot blurred in front of him as he walked to his bike, the weight of 15 years pressing down on his chest like a stone. Tank sat on his bike in the station parking lot for 10 minutes before he trusted himself to make the call. He ran his thumb over the screen, thinking through how to say it, but there was no soft way to say what needed saying. He dialed. Rachel picked up on the second ring. Tank? Hey, is everything okay? I need you to stay calm, he said, which he knew right away was the wrong way to start, because nobody stayed calm after hearing those words. I got called into the police station today. Craig filed a report against me. Silence on the line. Then, very small, what kind of report? He's saying I've been stalking you, manipulating you. Says I used the club to isolate you from him. Tank kept his voice even, steady, the same voice he used to use with scared kids sitting in the back of a squad car. It's not true, Rachel. None of it's true, and we both know it. But I'm on parole from something old, something that's got nothing to do with any of this. and it means they have to take the report seriously. Oh my God. Her voice cracked down the middle. Oh my God, Tank. I did this. I did this to you. You didn't do anything. If I had never gotten in your car, if I had never taken that stupid coffee, none of this would be happening to you. You'd still have everything you built. Your parole, your peace, all of it. Her breathing turned ragged over the phone, quick and shallow. You lost your whole career trying to help people, and now you're going to lose everything else because you tried to help me too. I'm the reason. I'm always the reason something goes wrong. Rachel, listen to me. I have to go, she said, and the line went dead before he could stop her. He sat there in the gray light of the parking lot, staring at the phone, wanting more than anything to drive straight to Denise's apartment and put his hands on Rachel's shoulders and tell her the truth until she believed it. But Reyes had been clear. No contact. Not now. So Tank did the only thing he could do. He called Denise instead and told her everything, and asked her to go sit with Rachel so she wasn't alone with this. By the time Denise got home from work, Rachel was sitting on the floor of the spare room with her knees pulled to her chest, the way she used to sit in her car outside her own apartment. Denise didn't say anything at first. She just sat down next to her on the floor and put an arm around her shoulders. He's going to lose everything, Rachel said, her voice raw from crying. Because of me. Because I couldn't just handle my own life. That's not how this works, Denise said quietly. You didn't put a badge and gun in Craig's hand and tell him to go make up lies. He did that all on his own. That's on him, not you. Marie showed up an hour later with a paper bag of takeout nobody touched, and she sat on Rachel's other side, her voice firm the way it was behind the counter of the diner when she wasn't about to let anybody talk themselves down. You listen to me, Marie said. Tank has spent 15 years being careful, being good. He didn't get careless because of you. Craig is the one throwing lies around because he's humiliated that his wife had the nerve to leave him. That man is the sickness here, not you. But it's my fault he's even involved, Rachel whispered. No, Denise squeezed her shoulder. It's your fault you finally let somebody help you. That's not a crime, Rachel. That's not something you should be sorry for. They sat with her long past midnight, the three of them on the floor with mugs of tea gone cold beside them. Denise and Marie taking turns saying the same true things in different words until something in Rachel's chest began to loosen, just slightly, like a knot finally giving under steady pressure. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, and when she looked up, there was something different in her eyes. The guilt was still there, but underneath it now was something harder. I'm going to fix this, Rachel said, her voice shaking but sure. Craig has lied about me my whole marriage. I'm not going to let him lie about Tank too. The lawyer's office smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, a small space above a hardware store that Sonny Ricci had rented for 20 years. He was a wiry man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a stack of files that never seemed to get any smaller. The Angels used him for everything from traffic tickets to custody battles, and he'd earned their trust the same way Tonk had earned Rachel's, slowly, through showing up. Sit down, Tank, Sonny said, not looking up from the papers in front of him. Tank sat. His hands felt too big for his lap, the way they always did in rooms with soft chairs and law degrees on the wall. I read the report, Sonny said. Craig Doyle says you've been watching Rachel Doyle for months. Following her. isolating her from him using, and I'm quoting here, the influence and intimidation of a motorcycle gang. That's not what happened. I believe you. Sonny finally looked up, and his eyes were tired but sharp. But believing you isn't the same as proving it, and with your parole status, this isn't a fight we can afford to lose on good faith alone. Tank felt something cold settle in his stomach. What do you mean? I mean your parole officer has to take any credible accusation seriously, and right now, on paper, this looks credible. A man with your history, showing up at a young woman's window at night, walking her to her door, giving her gifts. It sounds different when you strip out all the context, Tank. It sounds exactly like something that would violate your terms. I never touched her. Never said one thing that wasn't respectful. Ask Denise. Ask Marie. Ask anybody in that building. I will. I'm gathering statements right now. But statements from people who love you aren't as strong as hard evidence, and right now, we don't have any. Sonny leaned back in his chair, the springs creaking under him. Is there anything, and I mean anything, that could show exactly what happened between you and Rachel? Video, timestamps, anything outside of people's memories? Tank thought about it, working his jaw the way he did when he was trying not to say something he'd regret. There's cameras in the hallway of her old building. By the stairwell, by the mailboxes. I don't know if they'd catch anything outside, in the lot, but inside, maybe, that would help. If we can get that footage before it's overwritten or deleted, that could change everything. Sonny made a note. But Tank, I want you to hear this clearly, because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. If we can't find that evidence, or if it doesn't show what we think it shows, this could go bad. Real bad. Parole boards don't like uncertainty. They like clean answers. And right now, all we've got is your word against his. Tank nodded slowly, feeling the weight of every year he'd spent rebuilding something out of nothing, brick by brick, since the day the state took his badge. 15 years since the family that mattered to him with letters and rules had turned him out. 15 years since another family, the leather and chrome kind, had taken him in without asking questions. All of it, hanging now on a stairwell camera he wasn't even sure was still recording. I'll get you whatever you need, Tonk said. Good, Sonny said, because if this goes to a hearing, you're going to need every scrap of it. Tank rode home slower than usual, the wind doing nothing to loosen the knot in his chest. When he pulled into the lot outside his building, half the chapter was there waiting for him. Bikes lined up like a wall. Big Mike and Ronnie and half a dozen others standing around with their arms crossed, faces set in that particular grim solidarity bikers wore instead of tears. Somebody had a cooler of beer nobody was drinking. Somebody else had made calls to men Tank hadn't seen in years. Guys who owed him favors from another life. Guys who might know something about pulling old surveillance footage before it disappeared into a server somewhere. They clapped him on the back, told him it would be fine, told him they had his back no matter what came. But underneath the words, Tank could feel it, the same nervous current running through all of them, the unspoken truth that this could actually go wrong, that the system that had failed him once before might be getting ready to fail him again. He went inside eventually, alone, and sat by his window in the dark, looking down at the parking lot where all of this had started. The exact spot where he used to watch Rachel's car idle for hours, where he'd first walked out with 2 cups of coffee and no idea where it would lead. The lot was empty now. just cracked pavement and a flickering light. He sat there a long time, turning it over and over, wondering if trying to help her was about to cost him everything he had left. Rachel woke up before the sun did, her heart already pounding before her eyes even opened. For a second, she didn't know why. Then it hit her, sharp and clear, like someone had flipped a light switch inside her skull. The cameras. She sat straight up in bed, the blanket falling off her shoulders, her breath coming fast. Last year, right before Christmas, the building had put up new cameras. She remembered the flyer that had gone up in the lobby, a plain white paper with black letters that said notice, security camera installation for resident safety. She remembered because Craig had complained about it for a week straight, grumbling about privacy and management wasting money on things nobody needed. She remembered the little black domes that had appeared by the stairwell door and above the mailboxes, and how she'd walked past them 100 times without really thinking about what they meant. They had been recording. All those nights, Tonk had walked a few steps behind her, waiting until she was safely inside before he turned and left. It was all right there, on tape, time-stamped and undeniable. Rachel threw the blanket off completely and swung her legs out of bed, her bare feet hitting the cold floor of Denise's spare room. Her hands were already shaking, but not from fear this time. This was something else, something that felt almost like hope. If hope could make your whole body tremble. She didn't bother putting on socks. She padded down the short hallway to the living room, where Denise kept her old laptop on the kitchen table. The same one Denise used to check her email and look up recipes and watch shows after her daughter went to bed. The screen was dark, and Rachel's fingers fumbled with the trackpad, willing it to wake up faster. "Come on. Come on," she whispered to herself. The apartment was quiet. Denise was still asleep, and the sky outside the window was just barely turning gray, the kind of early morning light that made everything look like it was underwater. Rachel didn't care about the hour. She typed the name of her old apartment complex into the search bar with fingers that kept hitting the wrong keys, correcting herself twice before she got it right. Maple Grove Apartments, Management Office. The website that came up was plain and outdated, the kind of site that hadn't been touched since it was built. There was a phone number listed under a tab that said, "Contact us," along with an email address and an address for the leasing office, 2 buildings over from where she used to live. Rachel grabbed a pen from the cup by the toaster and scribbled the number onto the back of an envelope, her handwriting jagged and uneven from how hard her hand was shaking. She sat there for a moment, just staring at the numbers she'd written down. Somewhere in her chest, a voice that sounded a lot like Craig's whispered that she was making a mistake, that she should mind her own business, that stirring things up would only make everything worse. She had spent years listening to that voice. She had built her whole life around not upsetting anyone, around staying small and quiet and invisible. But Tank had never once used his voice against her. Tank had waited on her, patient as still water, night after night, never asking for anything back. And now, he was the one in trouble. Because of her. Because he had cared enough to make sure she got inside safely. She wasn't going to let that voice win this time. Rachel picked up her phone from the counter where she'd left it charging overnight and dialed the number before she could talk herself out of it. It rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, tired and clipped, clearly not expecting calls this early. Maple Grove Management. This is Pam. "Hi," Rachel said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. My name is Rachel Doyle. I used to live in Unit 3C, and I need to talk to someone about pulling some security footage. It's important. It's about a legal matter. There was a pause on the other end, papers shuffling. Okay, let me get someone to help you with that. Can you hold for just a minute? Yes, Rachel said. I can hold. She gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles white, and waited. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. Rachel stood at the front doors for a second, the manila envelope clutched to her chest like it might fly away if she loosened her grip. Inside were the printouts Pam had emailed her, plus a small USB drive with the actual footage. Denise stood on one side of her, and Marie stood on the other, both of them close enough that their shoulders almost touched hers. You ready? Denise asked quietly. Rachel nodded, even though her stomach felt like it was full of rocks. I have to be. They walked in together. The front desk officer was a young guy with tired eyes who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Rachel stepped up before her nerves could talk her out of it. I need to speak with the detective handling the case against Tank Morrison, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. My name is Rachel Doyle. I have evidence. The officer looked up, actually paying attention now. Give me 1 minute, he said, and picked up his phone. They waited in hard plastic chairs bolted to the floor, the kind that never felt comfortable no matter how you sat in them. Marie reached over and squeezed Rachel's hand once, firm and quick, like she was passing along some of her own strength. Denise kept her eyes on the hallway where a detective would eventually appear, watching for him like a guard dog. After what felt like forever but was probably only 10 minutes, a man in a wrinkled button-down shirt came out. He had graying hair and the kind of face that had seen 1,000 cases just like this one, tired but not unkind. Detective Reyes, he said, shaking Rachel's hand. You said you have evidence? Yes, Rachel said. About Tank Morrison. About my husband's report. Reyes led them back to a small room with a table and a computer already set up. Rachel sat down across from him, Denise and Marie taking seats just behind her, close enough that she could feel them there without turning around. She pulled the USB drive out of the envelope and set it on the table. This is footage from the security cameras at my old building. Maple Grove. Apartments. It covers 3 months. Every night, Tank walked me to my door. It's on here. Timestamped, Reyes plugged in the drive without a word, and the video came up on the screen. Rachel watched it with him, even though she'd already seen most of it that morning on Denise's laptop, her chest tight the whole time. There she was, walking through the parking lot, hunched into her coat, moving fast like she was trying to outrun something. And there was Tank, a few steps behind her, always a respectful distance back, never closer than he needed to be. He waited by the stairwell door every single time until she was inside. Then he turned around and walked away. Video after video, night after night, the same pattern, over and over, timestamps ticking along in the corner of the screen. He never touched me, Rachel said, her voice breaking a little for the first time. He never even talked to me most nights. He just made sure I got inside safe. That's all he ever did. Reyes nodded slowly, jotting notes on a pad next to the keyboard. Rachel kept going. She told him about Craig, about the isolation, the way he'd cut her off from her friends and family bit by bit until she didn't have anyone left to call. About the yelling behind closed doors that nobody ever saw and the flinching that had become as natural as breathing. about sitting in her car for hours every night, because going inside felt more dangerous than staying out in the cold. She told him everything, every detail she'd swallowed down for years, and it felt like lancing a wound that had been infected for far too long. When she finished, Reyes closed his notepad and looked at her steadily. "Mrs. Doyle, based on this footage and your statement, along with the corroborating accounts we've already gathered from your neighbor and Mrs. Marie here, we're going to be investigating your husband's report as a false complaint. Tank Morrison should be cleared shortly." Rachel let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for years. She walked out of that station into the sunlight with Denise and Marie on either side of her, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the air felt easy to breathe. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Tank was in his small apartment, boots up on the coffee table, a half-empty mug of black coffee beside him. He saw the number on the screen and almost didn't pick up, but he did. "Morrison," he said, his voice flat and careful. It was his parole officer, a woman named Sandra who had always been fair with him. Her voice came through clear and steady. "Tank, I'm calling with good news." The detective's report came through. Craig Doyle's complaint was unfounded, and they've closed the case. "You're clear. Your parole is intact. You don't have anything to worry about." Tank sat there for a long moment, the phone pressed to his ear, the words settling into his chest like stones dropping into still water. He didn't cheer. He was a man who'd learned to treat good news carefully, to hold it in both hands and look at it before he believed it was real. "Appreciate that, Sandra," he said at last. "I appreciate it more than you know. Just doing my job. And for what it's worth, I never thought you were a threat to anyone but the people who needed watching out for. You take care of yourself now." He hung up and sat in the quiet. He looked down at his hands, big and scarred from years of wrenching motorcycles and hauling whatever needed hauling, same as the work that made him useful to the club. And it hit him, all at once, the truth. She did it. Rachel, she stood in front of a detective, shaking but steady, and she kept from her story. And she cleared his name. She had the courage he had taught her to find, and she used it to give him back his becoming. That evening, there was no way around it. The club put together a small gathering at the clubhouse. It was the humble, familiar sort rather than the loud one. Not bravado, but warmth. The lights were string and low, the sound of chairs scraping. The hall had the smell of old wood and engine oil, a washtub of cold drinks, and a woman named Marie at the stove, stirring up a pot of chili that had been worked on all afternoon. Denise brought a giant bowl of potato salad, speaking to Rachel lightly, a grin on her face. The other bikers came in clusters, big men with beards and leather, shaking their heads and offering tank fists to bump. Rachel stood near the window, watching, the one thing that let silence stay while the crowd grew comfortable. Tank opened a cold soda and just stood there, a little away, watching her. He waited until the room settled. Then he walked over to her. He cleared his throat. "Rachel," he said. Now it was his voice that was rough. She turned from the window. "I owe her something," he said. "And it isn't a thank you for dinner." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small glass marble, feel of it, safe and smooth, round as the world and small enough to palm. He handed it to her. "This is just a thing, but it's a thing that helped me get through a couple of bad nights when I didn't think the club would make it." He paused. I want her to have this, because you made it through the hard part. And I believe this marble is my steadiness allotted to Rachel. So you go on, and you steady yourself." Rachel looked down at the marble. It was a deep blue, like the middle of the sky just before night falls. She closed her fingers around it. "I don't have words for what you did for me, Tank. You walked me to that door every night. You let me be scared at my own pace. You never pushed, never asked, never made me feel weak. That's why I had the strength to stand in that station. Because you showed me that real strength is just standing beside somebody until they learn to stand alone." The room went quiet. The strumming of an acoustic guitar from somewhere in the back, and the salt mists of the low light. "Here we are," Tank said finally, the corner of his mouth lifting. "The same two people who met on the parking lot. Out of apples. You got your own front door now." He correct and, he said, was still standing out there. "Only I'm the one who's carried me in." Rachel shook her head. "No, Tank, you're right about one thing. You're the one who carried me to it. All walks home from now on should feel this good." She held out her hand, and he shook it, rough palm combined against smaller, calloused skin, and like a promise, without needing to say. The party at that moment carried on around them. A cheer went up, the club bikers, and Tonk for peace, he sneered a rare quarter smile. So, they sat on that cracked bench, side by side, watching the last evening lift into the dark, the marble resting safely inside her pocket. They hadn't said much after that. They didn't need to. All the days ahead were theirs to walk through. And for the first time, in front of her own front door, nobody felt the need to knock. 1 month later, Rachel stood in the doorway of apartment 2B, a small unit across town with a kitchen window that caught the morning sun and a closet just big enough for the few clothes she'd bought with her own paychecks. The landlord, an older man named Mr. Petrosky, held out a pen. "Sign here, and here," he said, tapping the paper. "And that's it. It's yours." Her hand shook a little as she wrote her name. Rachel Doyle. Then she paused, looked at the pen, and crossed out the last name. She wrote her maiden name instead. Rachel Ellis. It felt strange to see it on paper, but good strange, like putting on a coat that had always been hers but she'd forgotten was in the closet. Mr. Petrosky didn't ask questions. He just took the lease, nodded, and handed her 2 sets of keys. "Congratulations," he said. "Welcome home." Home, the word still felt new in her mouth, like a food she hadn't tasted before but already knew she loved. That Saturday, Denise showed up in her beat-up minivan with boxes stacked in the back, a lamp poking out one window like some kind of strange antenna. Marie came behind her in her truck, a cooler of sandwiches and lemonade in the flatbed, because Marie never showed up anywhere without feeding people first. And Tank came last, his motorcycle idling low in the parking lot before he cut the engine, swinging his leg over like a man 20 years younger than his 45. They spent the whole afternoon carrying boxes up 2 flights of stairs, laughing when the couch got stuck sideways in the doorway, Tank grunting and turning it at an angle, while Denise shouted directions that didn't help at all. Marie unpacked the kitchen box, arranging Rachel's 3 mismatched plates and 2 coffee mugs like they were fine china. "You'll get more," Marie said, catching Rachel's eye. This is just the start. By evening, the apartment was mostly in order. Boxes flattened and stacked by the door for recycling, the lamp plugged in and glowing warm in the corner, the couch finally settled against the far wall. Rachel stood in the middle of her own living room, looking around at it. Her walls. her floor, her ceiling. Tank was the last to leave. He stood near the door, keys of his own jingling in his jacket pocket, watching Rachel look around the way a person looks at something they still can't quite believe belongs to them. "You did good," he said. "We did good," she corrected. He shrugged, the way he always did when he didn't want to take credit for something. Then, he nodded toward the wall by the entryway, where a small brass hook waited, empty. Rachel reached into her purse and pulled out the original set of keys, the ones Tank had given her that night at the clubhouse gathering, the symbol of Denise's spare room becoming, for a while, a true home. She hung them on the hook, right by the door, where she'd see them every time she came and went. "So I don't forget," she said. Tank looked at the keys for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "You won't forget. Not ever. But it's good to have a reminder anyway." He left not long after that, telling her to lock up behind him, an old habit that made her smile now instead of flinch. A month passed the way months do, filled with diner shifts and grocery runs and evenings spent reading on her new second-hand couch. Rachel learned the sound her own front door made when it locked, the particular creak of the third stair, the way the afternoon light hit her kitchen window just so around 4 o'clock. One ordinary evening, she finished her shift at the diner, said goodnight to Marie, and drove home under a sky turning soft shades of orange and purple. She parked in her usual spot, gathered her bag, and walked up the path toward her building. Her steps were steady. No hesitation, no glancing over her shoulder, no rehearsing excuses in her head for a man who was no longer any part of her life. Just the quiet, ordinary confidence of a woman walking home. Near the corner of the building, she caught sight of a light on in a window 2 floors up and across the lot, Tank's apartment, close enough that she could see him there, motionless, watching. She lifted her hand and waved once. Small and easy. Then she turned back to her own door, put her key in the lock, and stepped inside, closing it gently behind her. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.